Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have another vlog for you and this time I'm going to be reading some of Booktube's best books of 2023. Now the way that I was originally going to do this, it was just going to be reading my friends' top books of 2023, and I am still reading some of my friends' favourite books, but I also have other projects and things going on later in the year where I'm going to be picking from particular people's lists and whatnot. But in the end, what I decided to do was pick a few favourites from friends and then also some favourites from other booktubers that I just respect a whole hell of a lot here on YouTube. So people like Mara from Books Like Whoa. And I haven't got all of the books selected yet because not everyone has currently, as of the 11th of January, released their best books of 2023 yet. The other thing is I'm not necessarily picking their top book of the year. I'm picking something from their top list, and with the exception of I think 2 books currently, everything is something I've either had on my radar for a while or I've already owned. So far I can reveal 4 of the people who I will be reading best books from. I will be reading one of Heather's favourite books of the year, which is Last Light by Claire Kent. I've not read Claire Kent in ages, so I'm really excited to dive into this book. It is a dystopian-esque romance set at the end of the world, so I'm excited to get into that. I am also going to be reading Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This one I saw on Lala's best books of the year video and I'm intrigued. Also, I think this is the one time, like this is one of those times where the UK cover and it's foiling, like this is just the standard edition, this isn't a special edition. Foiling on this is stunning. I'm also going to be reading one of the books in Mara's best of 2023 list. That is The Last Cuentista by Donna Barber Higuera. I think, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, which I think translates, according to any time I try and scan this into any reading app, as The Last Storyteller. And I'm intrigued. It's middle grade, it is, I think, sci-fi, and I love this cover as well, actually. This cover I really like. I wanted to try and have a variety of readerships and also genres on here just to make it a little bit interesting, because I'm going to be doing this over a couple of weeks. It's definitely not going to be one I'm going to try and get done in a few days. Also on my list, and this one was a recommendation from Ashley from Bookish Realm, who is amazing. I knew I was going to try and pick a kid's book that she had recommended, because while I love all of her recommendations, my passion is children's literature and children's picture books, so I knew I was going to pick a kid's book from her, and that is Remember by the US Poet Laureate Joy Harjo and Caldecott medalist Michaela Goad. So I'm really excited. I'm actually going to read this one first because it's short and I can get that started today, but I will be sharing the other books that I'm planning on reading from some of my other friends in later clips. But as I said, not everyone has released their best of videos yet, so I'm just going to take this one step at a time. I'm going to start off with these 4 books. Always great to kick off a vlog with a truly exceptional book. I have no words. This is absolutely stunning. So this is actually a poem that Joy Harjo wrote, and it is a poem that asks the reader to stop and think about their connection to nature, their connection to the land where they are. And both the author and illustrator are Native American, so this is a truly gorgeous Indigenous text, and we all know how much I love those. And I do really enjoy finding Indigenous texts from around the world, not just from Australia, so this was just wonderful to read. But the poem is just stunning and beautifully written. The language in here is gorgeous. The illustrations, the paintings, I have no words. I just stopped and stared at the pages and just let it sink in. Like, it's a very immersive experience just reading this book. And the difficulty, I think, particularly with children's literature, adult titles, it's a lot easier to hear about international titles from around the world. I mean, the big ones you hear about, right? Kids books, it's a little bit different because in Australia we really push Australian children's literature. Like, we get the really big titles. You might see some publicity for those because they're big everywhere, Ulrich Rodens, etc. But picture books, we tend to have a bigger focus on Australian literature. Like, I would not be able to walk into a bookstore and find this. Maybe one of the kids specialist stores might have a few Native American titles, but generally speaking, like, I couldn't walk into a store and find this because the stores will push things that people know and people pick up what they know. So to hear about this from Ashley and to just, you know, decide to pick up a copy for myself and have it. I'm a huge fan of poetry. Poetry is one of my favorite things, particularly modern poetry. And yeah, like I really love, like I'm gonna go back and reread this a few times. Probably during the course of this video, because it is just a gorgeous book. It's really wonderful. So Ashley, thank you for the recommendation. I love this. Hi everyone. So I just finished reading The Last Cuentista by Donna Barbara Higuera, and this was one of the books that was on Mara's best of the year list. It is well, it's a middle grade book, but I'm going to say that it sits in that upper middle grade category that also straddles early young adult in terms of its storytelling style. And it is a science fiction story about the end of the world. We follow Petra, who is a 12-year-old girl who, with her family, is escaping Earth that's about to be hit by Halley's Comet. And she and her family and a group of individuals have all been put onto these giant spacecrafts that are being sent out to inhabit a new planet to preserve humanity in the wake of the disaster that's to come. And she and her family will be put in stasis for that time period, and there are going to be caretakers on the ship that look after all of these people in stasis for the next 350 or so years. So the story takes place, or starts off in 2061, and then we end up in 2200 and something-ish years time. So the story starts out in 2061. Petra goes onto this ship and her stasis doesn't work the way that it should. She comes from a family of storytellers, and that makes up her entire identity. And yet in stasis, she's being trained to be a botanist and a geologist and whatever. When she is finally awoken from stasis, she knows straight away that everything is wrong. The people who wake them up no longer resemble humans as they know them. Those people are trying to brainwash the survivors into basically having no individual identity. They all belong to the collective, and they are essentially trying to ensure that humans, or the last memories of humans, do not repeat the sins of the past. And of course, we all know that when you don't have love and humanity in there, that things can get a little bit sketchy. The very thing that you think you're trying to prevent, you become. This was both a really well-written, very well-told story, while also being incredibly creepy and disturbing in terms of its tone. And the entire time I was reading it, I was just thinking about our current world and how people want to try and eliminate the things that make us different so that we can all live harmoniously. But the very thing that makes us different is what should actually help us to live in harmony. But then, you know, we all know humans, and it's complicated. But yeah, this was a very interesting story, and I'm glad that I read it. I had not heard of it. I mean, I was really glad that I saw this on Mara's video, because I had legitimately not heard of it. So yes, I am glad that I read this one. Hi everyone, so I am reading the next book in the series of favorites, and this time I'm going with Izzy from Happy for Now's, or one of her favorites, which was Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop. I'm about 10 or 11% into the story, and it's really great so far. It is a Black love contemporary romance story, and it is going to be the relationship between the maid of honor and the best man at a wedding. The maid of honor is the sister of the person getting married, and her sister is marrying her ex-boyfriend. But there is no hard feelings on her part because she knew the relationship was over, but everyone walks around on eggshells with her because she was dating him at one point. This reminds me a little bit of Somebody to Love, because the entire wedding party is going away for an extra week before the wedding to relax and prepare. It's a destination wedding. So I'm interested in seeing where it goes. I'm enjoying it so far. It's really fun. There's some great humor in it. The writing's wonderful. So I have very high hopes for it. I just finished Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop, and it was excellent, truly excellent. As I said before, great characters, great writing. The initial setup or agreement that Janelle and Rome have is that they're going to have a friends with benefits arrangement for the first week of this 2-week-long wedding, destination wedding thing. The end of the first week is literally the 50% mark of the story, and unlike a stack of other books that I have read recently where the 50% mark basically to me just feels like where the story could wrap up, this one actually has a really well fleshed out second half of the book, because Janelle and her sister and Janelle and her mother have very strained relationships. They're quite toxic in the way that the other women in her family treat her, because she's a strong independent woman who doesn't really need anyone's help, and she doesn't take crap from anyone, but they see that in a really negative light and they treat her that way, to the point that everyone else around them can see it. And Rome is just a wonderful MMC because he sees her for who she is, and when he sees other people behaving badly towards her, he calls it out. And he is her biggest advocate and the person who helps her to see who he is. And, you know, there are plenty of wonderful grand gestures in here from Rome, and Janelle just finding the courage to put herself first and to draw a line between her relationships with some of her family who are toxic with her. So I appreciated that. But it was just very sweet, extremely steamy, wonderful. Hi everyone. So update, I have had my hair done, so that looks different and still looks nice because it was only done today. I was reading Last Light by Claire Kent while I was at the hairdresser today and just finished it tonight. So this was one of Heather's favorite books from 2023. I have read Claire Kent in the past. I read Hold a couple of years ago. Absolutely loved it. Just have never had a chance to go back to Claire Kent's work. So this was the perfect opportunity to do so, and it was fantastic. It will be one of my favorite books of the year as well for 2024. So this is a dystopian-ish romance because the world has ended and the survivors are now moving around trying to find safe places, but basically all of the resources are gone, and so people are having to scavenge what they can. We start off with Lainey, who has found a motorbike and is one of the last people to leave her town. She stayed to look after her grandmother, but her grandmother has died, and so she's trying to meet up with the rest of her town who are in Fort Knox? I can't remember. One of the forts, which is supposedly a safe haven for people who are looking for shelter. And she runs across a guy who was the mechanic from her town, Travis, and she thinks he's trying to steal her bike. Anyway, they meet up again on the road and they decide to travel together. He was sticking around in the town because he was caring for his sick daughter, but she has also passed away. And so the two become this unlikely pair traveling on the way. And the way that Heather had really sold this book was basically, this is a couple who, if the world had not ended, would never have had a relationship like that. It would not have happened. Their relationship is predicated on the fact that the situation they find themselves in creates the situation for them to have a relationship. There is an age gap. She is in her early 20s. He, I think, is in his 30s. And they start out just being there and taking care of one another on the road, and then they fall for one another. And it's about, you know, mostly it's just a traveling story as they're trying to get to their destination, and when they finally meet up with their people, they have to decide what it is that they're going to do next, because what they were hoping for, maybe it is and maybe it isn't what they wanted. And it was just delightful because there is a point in the book where they find this abandoned cabin that has basically been prepared by a doomsday prepper, or someone who was, you know, clearly preparing for the worst. And the whole time I'm just like, just stay here, just stay here. But yeah, there's a bit of a journey, but honestly, wonderful. Really, really wonderful book. Highly recommend it. Hi everyone, it is the 21st of January and I have just read another book from the list of books that I had selected from Booktuber's favourites list for 2023. This was Robin's pick, and I ended up going with Leviathan Song by Elsie Winters because this was a book that other people had recommended to me last year, and a book that I picked up during one of the Stuff Your Kindle Day sale things. I was always hesitant. I have read the prequel like a couple of years ago, and I remember just feeling fairly meh about it, like it was fine. I don't even remember the details of it, to be perfectly honest. But I know Robin has talked about the series a lot this year, and I know Heather has talked about the series a lot. And usually what has stopped me from picking this book up is because it's usually described as a fantasy or a cozy fantasy or whatever. It's actually much closer to a cozy paranormal romance. Like there's slightly more fantastical elements in it, but it actually feels very much like paranormal. And it wasn't until I started opening up the book on my Kindle and was reading sort of the author blurbs and you know, the suggested read-alike titles and authors, and someone said Ilona Andrews. I'm like, okay, well, I'll give this a shot. Now, this doesn't have as tightly woven a plot as an Ilona Andrews book, but it feels like a very cozy paranormal romance with slightly more fantastical elements version of Ilona Andrews. So yes, I really enjoyed this one. And the only reason I didn't pick it up sooner was because in my head, it was a fantasy romance, and I don't do straight up fantasy romance. So yes, I thoroughly enjoyed this one. It is very much more just this slice of life kind of story. There is an external plot to the romance that's kind of ongoing. So we have Alara, who is half elven, and so the way that the world is constructed, there is the human world, which is called by anyone with sort of magic abilities the void, because magic can exist, some magic can exist there, but it doesn't exist there necessarily on its own. And then you have the bound lands, which is where magic is at its peak, so sort of these parallel worlds. And Alara is half elven and comes from a very wealthy family, very long aristocratic sort of lineage, and she works with her best friend, who is the main character for the second book, I think. And they have like a trinket shop, and Alara can enchant objects or imbue objects with magic. She is also able to create golems, and this isn't something she likes to do a lot. Her father is quite a well-renowned golem maker, and like at the start of the book there's a premise. Someone comes to her asking for a golem and she says no, because that's not what she does anymore, and then she starts being pursued by people with nefarious purposes to make a golem, so she's sort of being stalked. But in between all of this, she meets Levi, who is a landlocked half merman. So his father, I think, is half merman and his mother was a mermaid, and there's some really cool mermaid mythology. Sort of like the setup for all of that is really cool, but I won't go into it in this video. Levi can't shift into a merman form, so he can't go into the ocean. He's landlocked, but he is also part siren, so he can sing, and when he talks he has a siren call that he can push and pull people away from him. Anyway, there's a connection between Alara and Levi, and then through a series of events and happenings they sort of come together more and more often. And then there is this sort of world plot where the sea sprites are being attacked by kelpies and killed, and so they send an emissary to Alara to see if she will build a golem to help protect them. This sort of forces her on a journey with Levi as they try and find a way to out-politic the mer people, who are rather unscrupulous, and try and find a way to create a golem that will benefit everyone living in the ocean. That part's really cool, but like this isn't something, it's not a fast moving plot. There's like this thing happens and this thing happens, and then there's a bit of a road trip where they're traveling on 2 giant stone golems, and then there's this thing that happens, and then whatever. So it's not something that you're going to go into expecting a fast-paced tense plot, because they're kind of two ordinary people who get caught up in politics and are just trying to do the best that they can, because Alara, you know, really wants to help out the water sprites and wants to do it because it's the right thing, not because she's being paid to do it or because someone is trying to accrue more power through her creating something that is dangerous and powerful. So it was fun and cozy and cute, and Alara and Levi are just adorable, and Levi's friends Jordan, who is a vampire, and Victor, who is a Grimm, are great. And I know that the Grimm's book is the last one, because I remember Robin talking about it. I will definitely be continuing the series because it was just a wonderful time reading it. There are high stakes for the world plot, but for the relationship plot, it was just, you know, them taking their time figuring out their relationship, and you know, there's a lot of things that are happening in there that they sort of have to work on. In particular, Levi's hang-ups with the mer culture and sort of how they raise children. Delightful. Really delightful. I'm actually really glad that I picked this one to read, because I was tempted not to, because I'm like, fantasy, romance, do I want to go that path? No. This is exactly the kind of paranormal fantasy romance that I like. Hi everyone. So I thought I would do a quick check-in because I've started the next book for this little project. I am reading Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This was a book that Kayla from Books and Lala really enjoyed. I happen to have a copy of it. This cover so much. It's so shiny and pretty, and this is like the quintessential little cozy fantasy book. It's totally not suited to my current climate, where it is rather warm, because this is taking place in a very small Norwegian fishing town during winter. You have Emily Wilde, who is a scholar about the Fae, trying to find out more about the fair folk from this part of the world for an encyclopedia that she is writing. And she is accompanied, much to her chagrin, by Wendell Brambley, who is a professor at Cambridge with her. But she has suspected for a while that he is maybe not quite human. And he is an utterly delightful character, let me tell you. Like, he is just delightful to read on page. He is kind of chaos personified compared to Emily, who is very much an independent, solitary creature, much like myself. And yeah, I'm just thoroughly enjoying it at the moment, so I thought I would just stop and check in because they're currently setting off to try and track down 2 young members of this small town who have been taken by the Fae overnight. I'm hopefully going to finish this tonight. Alright, so I'm done with Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries, and this was just delightful. I do not often read what is a straight up fantasy book very often, but I found myself enjoying this one quite a lot. I liked the voice of the narrator, so it's told in diary entries by Emily and occasionally by Wendell under much sufferance, and it's just a whole lot of intriguing plots. Emily is very intelligent and knowledgeable about the Fae, and this gets her into trouble as much as it gets her out of trouble. And even though she does not like people very much at all, or spending time with them, which relatable, she finds herself coming to care about what happens to the people in this town where she is staying, and this causes her to make some decisions that lead to some interesting consequences. But I really liked her relationship with Wendell, and as I said, he was just my favorite in this book because he is just, with who and what he is, I mean, you can probably read between the lines with this, but his personality is just so fun to read about. There is the start of a relationship between the 2 of them, which totally blindsides Emily, but yeah, this was great. I'm glad that I did pick it up, so we'll take that as another win. Hi everyone, so we are back with the next book that I'm reading for Booktube's Best of 2023. Still haven't decided what I'm calling this video, despite the fact that I've been reading a bunch of books for a whole month. But anyway, I'm sure I'll figure something out by the time that the video goes live. So Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez was on Bethany's Best of book list, but I also know that Brie loves this book. I think she read it in 2022 and she loved it. And I also know, I think Izzy has also spoken about it, and I think that was also 2022. So I'm excited that I'm finally getting to it. I'm already this far into it and it is freaking delightful. I mean, I want to hurt Alexis's ex-boyfriend because he is, I actually don't think I have words strong enough, or words that I actually want to share on the internet for what I think of him. He is a very nasty man and deserves all sorts of nasty consequences for the way he gaslights and treats Alexis. But Alexis is an ER doctor and she comes from a long line of very prestigious surgeons, and her parents are also gaslighting trash bags, and they want to make sure that she is deeply unhappy with her life, and she feels like she has to stay working at the hospital that her family has worked at since it's opened because they've named things after her family. And she has all of this pressure. Her brother has gotten married and left the country and won't even bring his wife back to meet the parents because the parents are awful. And she ends up getting stuck in this small town. She runs her car off the road by accident and meets Daniel, who is a local, and he helps pull the car out of the ditch. And they end up having a one-night stand before she leaves and goes back to her life. But she kind of can't stay away and she ends up coming back, and the 2 of them start up this long distance relationship, which is like a friends with benefits kind of situation initially. But Daniel is falling really hard for Alexis, and he is a precious cinnamon roll who also is dealing with an awful parent who is so many awful parents in books. But they're kind of finding their equilibrium, and Alexis is really realizing that the people that she is surrounded by are not necessarily people that she really wants to be surrounded by. She's beginning to recognize the toxic traits of people around her, and she is falling for Daniel even though she knows that it wouldn't be acceptable. She is 10 years older than him, and she knows how the people that she associates with would perceive the situation. She also doesn't want to give her ex ammunition by letting him know that Daniel exists. The ex has also decided to move back into their house because he's awful. But what I'm kind of loving is that there's a character in this small town who has this theory that the town lets people go who are not good for the town or who don't want to stay in the town, but it always finds the people that the town needs or that belong to the town. And so he keeps making comments about how Alexis keeps turning up to help when people are in need. So she ended up helping him when he'd fallen out of bed, and there's just been a scene where she's delivered a baby for a pregnant woman who was in distress. So like, it's really cool. And I know there's going to be some things that I really don't like that happen probably in the next, I don't know, this many pages, because it's a romance book and it's traditionally published, but it's damn good. Like, it's from the very first page, I was hooked. The writing style in it is just great. It's really good. So I'm having a great time. I'm gonna keep reading. All right, so I finished Part of Your World, and this is excellent. If you haven't read it, I can't recommend it enough. It is fantastic. There are some slight magical realism elements in it in terms of the town keeping the people, or trying to keep the people that it needs. But, you know, very, very big content warnings in here for gaslighting, for emotionally abusive and manipulative parents, for an emotionally manipulative relationship and toxic ex. There is also a side character in the book who is currently experiencing domestic violence, and that is something that Alexis is able to, you know, talk to that person about and try and help them on their journey to being able to help themselves, because it is very much a situation where you're in it and you can't see a way out that doesn't make things worse. So like that part of it is really powerful. I got teary but I didn't cry, which I think everyone said, you know, these books make you cry, but I was teary. But I just love Alexis and Daniel so much. They're just really, really precious. Also, there is a baby goat in here. There is a town pig who just wanders around doing all sorts of crazy shenanigans. There is a former hunting dog who has some questionable training issues, and yeah, just really, really fun. So I'm glad that I picked this up because it was on Bethany's list, and it is well worth checking out if you are interested. I will say it's not quite closed door, but it's also not quite open door. It's the partially open door. Take that as you will. But now I have one more book left to read for this video, so hopefully I'll get to that this weekend. Hi everyone. So I have finished the last book for this vlog, which was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson, which is part of his Kickstarter secret project thing that he was doing. And I have dabbled in and out of Brandon Sanderson over the years, so I'm not super confident in his Cosmere, and this is part of the Cosmere universe. And there are definitely elements in this story that require knowledge of the Cosmere, because I'm sitting there going, I think I get it, maybe. But that said, the actual story point, the point of the story in this one, you can read on its own. So this was a book that Shay really enjoyed last year, and I'm glad that I read it. It's one of those books, I really enjoyed it, but again, it's one of those books where I think the first half of the book probably needed to be about half the length that it was, because this book is just over 400 pages, I think. Sorry, it's 460 according to my Kindle. Honestly, I wasn't deeply invested in this story until halfway through the book. And it's not to say that it wasn't well written, it wasn't funny. Like, there is a lot of humor woven into it. There is sort of this third party narrator who is telling the story for most of the book, who happens to be some kind of higher entity that is frozen as a coat rack. But essentially we have two characters. We have Painter, who is a nightmare painter. His name is Nikaru, and his job in his world that is plagued by nightmares who come at night and steal people's energy while they're dreaming. His job is to paint them away. We know that he is quite isolated in this world, that he had friends, but something happened, and we find out sort of what that was along the way. And our second character is Yumi, who lives somewhere else, and it is her job to call spirits forth, and these spirits are then able to help out people in the towns that she visits, and her life is dictated by ritual and routine. And then suddenly Painter and Yumi's lives become intertwined, and they find each other crossing over into each other's world, attached to the other person's physical body, and they are complete opposites. And it takes a while for them to find their equilibrium, which is why the first half of the book is so long. So like, I get why it's there, because we need that set up and we need to see how their relationship develops. But honestly, the most interesting stuff happens in the second half of the book, when you begin to realize what's happening, what the nightmares are, even just where these two characters are located, because they think they're on separate planets, but we begin to realize that there's a lot going on, and maybe that's not exactly what's happening. So I think this is a really clever book. At times I think Brandon Sanderson is trying to be a bit too clever with what he's doing. I think it's a bit on the nose at times, but overall the story is quite clever. And the sort of ending that we get, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I think it's a pretty good commentary on some things that are, you know, very contemporary topics in our world. But yeah, I like the relationship between Yumi and Painter and the way that they found their equilibrium, and how they began to understand each other, and how the other person works, and how they sort of sought balance, which is another big thing in here. It was a really interesting read, and I knew it was probably going to be one of the more trickier ones that I picked up, because it is very much straight up fantasy, but I did enjoy it, and I'm glad that I read it, because I haven't read Brandon Sanderson in a couple of years, I don't think. So yes, this was my project, reading 8 booktubers' favorite books from 2023. And I like that it sort of took me out of my comfort zone, and I think it was a great experience overall. Like, none of these books would have been less than a 4-star read for me, and there were quite a few 5 stars in here, and I think that's great. So I will leave everyone linked down below, as well as their videos where they recommended these books. Yeah, I get to add a whole bunch of new books onto my favorites of 2024 list, which is awesome. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this and you got through the whole thing, because I'm pretty sure this is going to be a really long vlog, feel free to leave a book stack emoji down below. And I hope that wherever you're on the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Bye everyone.